I want you to picture something. Picture 240 people sitting in rows of white chairs with fresh flowers on every aisle, and a string quartet playing softly, and the specific kind of warm afternoon light that makes everything look like it belongs in a movie. Picture a woman in a dress she spent 4 months finding, not because she is vain, but because she believed this day was worth 4 months of searching for the right dress. A woman who has been awake since 5 in the morning, not from nerves, but from the particular, electric anticipation of someone who is absolutely certain that what is about to happen is the right thing. Picture her walking toward the altar, her father's arm in hers, the faces of people she loves turning to watch her come down the aisle, the music swelling in the way it does in those moments, not like a soundtrack, but like the world has decided to underline what is happening. Now picture her standing at that altar, bouquet in her hands, and the doors at the back of that room never opening. 5 minutes, 10, 15, the music stops. The string quartet does not know what to do. The 240 people do not know what to do. Her father does not know what to do. Her phone buzzes in her maid of honor's hand. A text message. From the man who was supposed to be walking through those doors. Not a call, not a letter. Not an appearance, not a conversation, not any form of communication that requires facing the person you are about to devastate. A text message. That said, and I am going to tell you exactly what it said because I have not forgotten a single word. I can't do this. I'm so sorry. Please don't try to call me. That was it. That was the entire message. After 4 years together, after an 18-month engagement, after 240 people and 4 months of dress shopping and a string quartet and the most hopeful morning of my entire life, that was what he gave me. I stood at that altar in my wedding dress, and I read that message and I made a decision in that moment that I did not fully understand at the time, but that I have thought about every single day since. I was not going to let that text message be the most important thing that ever happened to me. My name is Emma, and what I built in the 2 years after that afternoon, what I became in the space that Ryan left behind, is the thing I want to tell you about today, because this is not a story about what he did. It is a story about what I did next, and I promise you, the ending is nothing like what any of those 240 people expected when they quietly folded their programs and filed out of that room. Stay with me. Ryan and I met at a mutual friend's birthday dinner when I was 26. He was charming in the way that reads, at 26, as confidence, easy in a room, quick with a laugh, the kind of person who makes you feel immediately at ease because he is so visibly at ease himself. We dated for 4 years before he proposed. 4 years is long enough to know someone, or so I believed. Long enough to have seen them in difficult moments, in boring moments, in the ordinary daily texture of a real relationship rather than the curated highlights of early romance. He proposed on a Tuesday evening. Nothing dramatic, a quiet dinner at a restaurant we both loved, a ring I later learned he had been carrying in his coat pocket for 3 weeks because he kept almost doing it and losing his nerve. I said yes immediately. I did not need time to think. The engagement was 18 months. We planned the wedding together, genuinely together, not the division of labor where one person handles the details and the other shows up. He had opinions about the venue and the menu and the flowers. He was present. He seemed, for all 18 months, like someone who was building toward something he wanted. I have spent a significant amount of time, in the 2 years since, trying to identify the signs I missed. I have not found many. Not because I was blind or naive, but because I think Ryan had not yet fully understood his own ambivalence. I think the person who sent that text was as surprised by himself as I was. That does not make it acceptable, but it makes it human. And understanding it as human rather than monstrous was one of the things that eventually allowed me to move past it, though that understanding came much later. On the day itself, human was not the word I was working with. I have been asked many times what the actual experience of standing at that altar was like, the minutes of waiting before the text arrived. I want to answer that honestly because I think the honest answer is more interesting than the dramatic version. It was not immediately frightening. The first 5 minutes felt like a logistics delay, something minor, a car that wouldn't start, traffic on a route nobody had accounted for. I was not alarmed. I was mildly impatient in the way brides are allowed to be mildly impatient on their wedding day. By 10 minutes, the quality of the waiting had changed. I could feel it in the room, the specific shift in collective energy when 240 people move from expectant to uncertain. My father tightened his grip on my arm slightly. Caroline, my maid of honor, my best friend of 11 years, moved closer to me without saying anything. By 15 minutes I knew. I did not know what I knew. I did not yet have the information, but something in me had already understood that the doors were not going to open the way I had been imagining them opening since 5 o'clock that morning. When my phone buzzed in Caroline's hand, she looked at the screen before she showed it to me. I saw her face change. Then she turned the phone toward me and I read the message. I read it twice. Then I handed the phone back to her. I looked out at 240 people who were watching me with the specific expression of people witnessing something they do not know how to respond to. I looked at the flowers on the altar. I looked at my father, who looked like he was deciding whether to say something or simply stand there as solidly as possible. He chose solidly. It was the right choice. I did not cry. Not then, not in front of those 240 people. I made a choice, in approximately 4 seconds, that I was not going to give that room a collapse to remember. I was going to give it something else. I turned to Caroline and I said, quietly enough that only she could hear, "Tell the caterers we are still eating. Nobody paid for a reception they are not going to have." She stared at me for a moment. Then she said, "Okay." We had the reception, without a groom. 240 people ate and drank, and some of them danced, and I moved through that room in my wedding dress, and I spoke to every single person there, and I did not cry once. I saved that for later. I want to be honest about what the weeks after looked like, because the version where the reception speech was the turning point, and I was immediately strong would be a lie. The reception was adrenaline. What came after the adrenaline wore off was something different. I went to my parents' house that night. My mother, Linda, met me at the door and did not say anything. She just held me, and I stood in the doorway of my childhood home in my wedding dress, and I finally cried in the way I had been holding back for 5 hours. Not prettily, not briefly. The weeks that followed were the most disorienting of my life, not because of the heartbreak alone, though that was real and significant, but because of the specific disorientation of a future that had been concrete suddenly becoming shapeless. I had built the next chapter of my life around a shared structure. The apartment we were going to move into together. The cities we had discussed. The children we had named, privately, in conversations that now felt like they belonged to a different person's life. All of that was gone. Not gradually, instantly, completely, in the space of a text message. Ryan reached out twice in those first weeks. A longer message the day after the wedding that explained more than the text had, but that I found, on reading it, less illuminating than I had expected. And a phone call 3 weeks later that I let go to voicemail and never returned. Not out of cruelty. Out of an instinct, clear and calm by that point, that there was nothing in that conversation that would give me something I needed more than I needed the space to figure out what came next. My mother said something to me about 3 weeks and that I have returned to many times since. She said, "Emma, you did not lose your future today. You found out at the last possible moment that the future you had planned was built on ground that was not solid. That is painful, but it is better than finding out later." She was right. I did not fully believe her for several more weeks, but she was right. Here is something about me that is relevant to what came next. For 4 years of our relationship, I had been quietly sitting on a business idea that I had not pursued because the timing never felt right. I worked in event planning, corporate events, product launches, large-scale gatherings. I was good at it. I had spent 7 years developing a specific skill set around creating experiences that felt personal and intentional rather than generic and logistical. And I had watched enough events fall flat despite significant budgets to understand exactly where the gap was between what clients wanted and what most event companies delivered. My idea was a boutique event company focused entirely on intimate, high-touch experiences, smaller events, deliberately smaller, where the budget went into genuine personalization rather than scale. Private dinners, small celebrations, experiences designed around specific people rather than standard packages. I had the idea. I had the skills. I had 7 years of industry relationships. What I had never had, or had never given myself, was the specific urgency that makes the risk of starting feel smaller than the risk of not starting. Standing in my parents' kitchen at 30 years old, with a wedding dress in a garment bag in the guest room and a future that had just been returned to me unopened, I had the urgency. I called Caroline. I told her what I was thinking. She said, without a pause, "I have been waiting for you to say that for 4 years. What do you need?" 3 months into building the business, working from my apartment's kitchen table, clients coming slowly through referrals, revenue modest but real. I attended a small industry networking event that I had almost skipped because I was tired and behind on 3 deliverables and not in the mood. I always skip the things that matter most. I have noticed this about myself. At that event, I met Patrick, a retired event industry executive who had built and exited a successful company in his 50s and who attended industry events. He told me, because retirement bored him and he liked to see what people were building. We talked for an hour. I told him what I was building and why, not the polished version, the real version, including the fact that a canceled wedding had been the specific catalyst. He did not react to that detail with pity or with the careful neutrality of someone avoiding a sensitive subject. He nodded and said, "Good. Necessity is a better founder than comfort. What are the 3 things standing between where you are and where this company needs to be?" Nobody had asked me that question. Not that specifically. I answered it, and in answering it I realized I knew the answer, which meant I had been sitting on the solution without having organized it into the right question. Patrick became my mentor. Bi-weekly calls, direct feedback, introductions to 3 clients who became the foundation of the company's early reputation. He asked for nothing in return except, as he put it, to watch you not waste what you clearly have. I did not waste it. The business grew in the specific way that service businesses grow when the product is right, through word of mouth, through reputation, through clients who had a genuine experience telling other people about it. My first-year revenue was modest. Real, but modest. I kept it, every dollar reinvested, nothing extracted, operating lean in the specific way of someone who knows the difference between revenue and profit and is not going to confuse them. My second-year revenue was 4 times the first. Not because I had grown dramatically in client count. I had grown deliberately, keeping the client list smaller than I could have filled because the model required a level of attention that scale would have diluted. Caroline joined the company full-time at month 14. She had been contributing time informally since the beginning, and formalizing it was simply a matter of matching the title to the reality. She became my operations director, and the business became, from that point forward, genuinely ours rather than mine with her help. By the end of year 2, we had been featured in 2 industry publications. We had a wait list. We had turned down 3 potential clients, not because we did not want the revenue, but because the events were not the right fit for what we were building, and the wrong fit, accepted for the money, would have cost us more than the revenue was worth. Patrick called me after the second industry feature and said in his direct way, "You built what you said you were going to build. Most people don't." I told him I had had good reasons. He said, "You had good reasons and you did the work. The reasons don't matter without the work." He was right. I know you have been waiting for this. Here it is, and I want to give it to you honestly rather than dramatically, because the honest version is actually more complete. I found out through Caroline, who still had mutual connections with Ryan's social circle, that the reason Ryan had not come through those doors was not a sudden attack of cold feet in the abstract sense. He had been seeing someone, a woman named Victoria, whom he had met 8 months before our wedding, and whose existence had apparently grown from something he told himself was insignificant into something he could not walk away from. A realization that he had arrived at, with extraordinary timing, the morning of our wedding. Victoria and Ryan moved in together 2 months after the wedding that did not happen. 8 months after that, Ryan sent me a message that I found remarkable in its specific, accidental poetry. He said that Victoria had ended things. He said he had been doing a lot of thinking. He said he wanted me to know that what he had done was the worst thing he had ever done to another person, and that he thought about it regularly. He did not ask for anything. I want to give him that The message did not ask for forgiveness or a response or reconnection. It was simply an acknowledgement, sent into the void with no expectation attached. I read it once. I thought about it for a day. Then I wrote back 2 sentences. I told him I had received his message and that I hoped he was well. Nothing more. Not because I was performing restraint, but because 2 sentences was genuinely all I had for him. The anger had been processed. The grief had been processed. What was left was something so small and so far behind me that 2 sentences covered it completely. The business was 6 months old when that message arrived. I had a wait list and a business partner and a mentor and a company that was mine in a way that nothing built around Ryan's presence could ever have been. His message arrived into a life that had no room for it. That is the best version of this I can offer you, not triumph, not revenge. Just the simple fact of a life so full of what it was becoming that the past had genuinely run out of space. I want to tell you about James briefly, not because the relationship is the point of this story, but because I think leaving him out would be its own kind of dishonesty. I met James 18 months after the wedding. Through Patrick, as it happened, a connection made at a dinner Patrick had organized for a small group of people in adjacent industries. James was not dramatic. Not in the way Ryan had been dramatic, not immediately electric, not the kind of person who fills a room by instinct. He was quiet in a way that I had learned, by then, to read correctly. The quiet of someone who is paying attention rather than the quiet of someone who is not there. He initiated. That was the first thing I noticed. He called when he said he would call, made plans, and showed up for them. Was present in the ordinary daily way that I had spent 2 years learning to value above everything else. We have been together for 8 months now. It is the most uncomplicated relationship I have ever been in, uncomplicated not because it requires no effort, but because the effort is reciprocal and honest and does not require me to compensate for someone else's absence. I told him about the wedding early, within the first few weeks of dating. He listened without performing the appropriate reactions. When I finished, he said, "That sounds like it was genuinely terrible, and also like it was exactly what needed to happen." I said, "Yes, that is exactly what it was." He said, "Good, then we don't have to spend any more time on it." I have not spent much time on it since. I called this story a comeback. I want to examine that word for a moment because I think it is almost right, but not entirely. A comeback implies returning to something, getting back to a previous state that was interrupted. What happened to me was not a return. There was no previous state that I was getting back to. What happened was a departure, a forced, painful, unwanted departure from the future I had planned, that sent me in a direction I would not have chosen, and that turned out to be the direction that fit. The business I built did not exist in the future I had planned. The partnership with Caroline did not exist there. Patrick did not exist there. The version of myself that I have become in 2 years of building, something entirely mine, that did not exist there either. None of that means the wedding should have been canceled. None of it means the grief was not real, or that what Ryan did was acceptable, or that standing at that altar reading a text message was anything other than genuinely terrible. It means that terrible things sometimes open doors that would not have opened otherwise, and that the opening is not a gift from the terrible thing. It is a gift from what you decide to do with the space it leaves. I walked into that room prepared to begin a chapter that someone else had written. I walked out of it with the first page of one I was going to write myself. 2 years later, the business, Caroline, Patrick, James, the waitlist, the features, the version of myself that knows what she is building and why I am still writing it. And I have not once wished it had gone differently on that afternoon. Not once. If you have had something taken from you, a relationship, a plan, a future you had built in your mind in careful detail, and you are sitting in the early weeks of that loss wondering what comes next, I want to say something to you directly. The space that a loss leaves is real. It is painful and disorienting, and the people who tell you it is secretly a blessing in the first weeks are not entirely wrong, but are definitely too early. But the space is also space. And space, eventually, when you are ready, on your timeline and nobody else's, is something you get to fill. What you fill it with is entirely up to you. And the fact that it is entirely up to you, That is the part that turns out to matter most. Leave a comment below if this story hit something for you today. Tell me where you are in your own story. I read every single one.